Editing is where we delve further into the realm of the senses. We're going to start off by looking at this from a fairly psychological point of view, taking things apart and understanding why certain cuts work and why they don't work, what they do and how they affect the audience, and how that affects the overall shape and pace of the story. There's an amazing filmmaker called Walter Murch, who has a really strong and interesting theory on filmmaking, which is called the blink of an eye. Murch states that when we're talking to someone, we keep our eyes open normally, and then when we come to the end of a thought, we make a blink, as if we're moving on to the next thought, or the next clause of the sentence, or next part of the idea. This blink is like a cut in film. This means that when we make a blink, we're literally making a cut in our reality, much like a cut in a film. When we blink our eyes in real life, we don't think, I've got to blink my eyes now. No, it's a pre-rational process. And Murch says that the edit, the cut, comes from the same place. It's a pre-rational process. As a filmmaker, you make a cut when it feels right. When I'm editing, I often beat my hand off the table when it's the right moment for the cut to come. So I've got a physical process telling me, poof, this is what's going on. I know I can externalise it and put it outside. That's the moment to cut. This allows us to ask the question, what motivates the cut? Why is it the right time to cut? Finding the motivation behind camera movement when it's exactly the right time to move the camera and the motivation behind a cut is vital. If you get it right, it feels totally natural and sincere. But if you get it wrong, it feels kind of uneasy and quite insincere very often. The notion of motivation in cinema is really worth exploring. We touched on it last time, but there's so much to look at in this. It opens up so many different ways of working with both the camera and the edit. In the past, editing was literally a physical process, where you would have to physically cut the film and stick it together with another piece of film to make the whole film. That's why we still say cut. And it's also why we say footage, because film was recorded on lengths of film, which were measured in feet. So you'd go out and you'd make a certain amount of footage a day. Remember that filmmaking is about choice. We choose to film things, and we choose to keep them in the edit. We also choose how they go together in the edit. Choosing how they fit together allows us to elicit the desired response that we want from our audience. One of the clearest ways of looking at how editing works and how it affects the audience is to look at something called the Kuleshov effect. Lev Kuleshov was a Russian filmmaker who wanted to identify how film was different as an art form from theatre, literature and painting. He was working in the 1920s in Russia. What he noticed was that when a series of shots is strung together, it allows an audience to infer more meaning than just a shot on its own. One of the key examples of this was a shot of a man staring at an object, where shot 1 shows the man staring neutrally at something in the distance, and shot 2 shows the object, in this case, a Tunnock's caramel wafer.
Shot 3 then shows his reaction to the object.
When we see the shots together, we think, he's hungry. Then we see exactly the same shot of the man, followed by something else. In this case, a dog. This time, when we see the shots together, we think, he's caring. By seeing the shots in sequence, the audience hopefully infer the meaning that you're wanting to communicate. As filmmakers, documenting the human impact of climate change, this will be one of your key tools. How can we allow an audience to feel what we want them to feel? Well, by structuring your shots very cleverly in the edit is one way. When you're editing, you choose the structure of the shots the audience sees, as I've said, and you assemble together everything as a whole, setting up questions and making connections, presenting arguments and generating meaning that the audience can then decode for themselves. This process draws the viewer into the story of the film and then takes them into the reality of the film. It's through the process of editing a film that it's given its structure and shape. So how does editing work? Well, the simplest cut you can do is a cut. which lies at the core of everything. A cut is where one shot is suddenly replaced by another. Within a scene or sequence, shots are mostly strung together using cuts. Another option is the dissolve. A dissolve is where one shot fades out while another one fades in. A dissolve can signify change in time or place. The fade. Fade-outs and fade-ins are where one shot fades to black, then the black lightens into the next shot. Fades provide a definite end to a part of a narrative. It's like a full stop in filmmaking, the end of a thought. Quite often it signals a dramatic pause in the story. The pacing and sequencing of shots affects how the audience relates to what they're seeing. Editing creates the rhythm and pace of the story. It's the beating heart driving the story along visually. A steady rhythm has all sorts of shots at approximately the same length. So how would this make an audience feel? An accelerating rhythm would have a series of shots getting shorter and shorter. How does this make an audience feel? Generally speaking, when you're watching a film, you should be so wrapped up in the story that you don't actually notice that you're watching a film that someone has made. The film should be presented as a unified thought. A compelling world that sucks you in and takes you away from your couch or your toilet seat, looking at you. One of the ways to achieve this comprehensive feel in a film is to use what's called continuity editing. One of the most important ways to work with continuity editing is to use a process called centering. Now, this is something that you probably have heard of before, but maybe not have heard it expressed in this kind of way. We all know this stuff instinctively, but it's quite useful in terms of developing our filmmaking craft to explore it in a slightly more detailed manner. The process of centering starts when the film is being shot. The filmmaker needs to establish a centre line on set as clearly as possible, and all camera placements will be on one side of that line. This is called the line of action. If you cross the line, backgrounds and character positions will change around, they'll flip, and it will appear all wrong on screen, and the viewer will lose their place completely. They won't know visually where they are. So it'll disorientate them and pull them out of the story. If that rule is broken and the line is crossed, suddenly characters on screen look like they're facing the same way and the scene doesn't quite make sense. Now, you can make a point of crossing the line for specific dramatic effect, but make sure if you do it that you communicate that you're doing it very clearly so that the audience understand what's happening and what your intention behind the move is. Following on from the logic of the line of action, one of the most familiar edits you'll be aware of is shot and reverse. Now, Shot in Reverse wasn't a 2000s cop show set in Dundee that was cancelled in 2002 after one series. No. It's where you see a shot from one way and then the other side of it. Where a character looks is a vital piece of information. Eye lines between characters should match if they're talking to each other, unlike here. It's a really useful technique which builds the reality of a situation for the audience. It shows where the character is looking. It's, again, a type of POV shot. Another shot combination is called match on action. This is where the action, or the logic of a piece of action on screen, carries on from one shot into the next, such as a ball being thrown from one shot to the next. Here's an exercise for you. Look at how this actor is shot in 3 different ways. The camera follows them in a following shot. We then see the world from their eyes in a point of view shot, or a POV shot. We then see some of the action from a fixed point, or static shot, where the camera is locked off. Using your editing software, download these clips and edit them on your device into a short sequence.